I didn't know about.
I just have an immediate...
Well, what time does that mean? What time is it? What
time
it is
time.
For now.
It's actually time for my actual debut. This is like my first interview that's going to air being a part of the collective here at IMRU Radio. I'm very proud. I had the opportunity to speak to playwright Robert Patrick and learned an awful lot, and I think you guys will too. Here's my interview with Robert Patrick. I'm Vash, Boddie. I thought I knew theater history. I thought I knew what it meant to create something out of nothing. I thought I knew a lot of things until I met playwright Robert Patrick. This is his story.
The nominees for Best Featured Actress in a Play are Mary Beth Hurt for Trelawney of the Wells, Shirley Knight for Kennedy's Children, Lois Nettleton for They Knew What They Wanted, and Meryl Streep for 27 Wagons Full of Cotton. And the winner is Shirley Knight for Kennedy's Children.
Hey, I just want to say that it was a privilege to appear in Robert Patrick's play, Kennedy's Children.
My birth name was Robert Patrick O'Connor. It was accidentally changed to Robert Patrick on the program for my first play. I was born September 27th, 1937 in Kilgore, Texas, in the shadow of somebody else's oil well. But we moved around so much as my parents looked for work that I never went to school in one school for a whole year until my senior year of high school in Roswell, New Mexico. I came from people who did not value intelligence, talent, or homosexuality. In fact, any man who had one of those things was suspected of all three. And believe it or not, homosexuality was not the worst. I was beat up in grade school, junior high school, and high school for carrying books. I was never beat up for being gay. It was for being smart. Like so many people of my generation, I fled to move to a big town. And I did, via a small town, Kennebunkport, Maine, where I spent a summer at the famous Kennebunkport Playhouse, learning everything about how to do theater that I had not learned in college. Some friends from the Playhouse drove me to New York to visit a friend from college who lived there. He was not home, so I took a subway to see Greenwich Village, thinking it would be the only time I'd ever see it in my life. I followed a pretty boy into a place called the Cafe Chino, which was so wonderful a place. It was a place where you were actually valued for being intelligent, talented, or gay. And I never left. I took a job near the Chino, an office job, so I could run from work to the Chino to mop or shop or whatever they needed just to be allowed to stay. And eventually, when helping to move furniture in for the set of Pulitzer Prize winner Lanford Wilson's first play, I got an idea for another story that could be told with that same furniture. I went home and wrote a play called The Haunted Host. Lanford and I were living together. He was writing The Madness of Lady Bright at a table in the daytime, and I was writing The Haunted Host at the same table at night. So the two plays that people call the first two gay plays are both the first gay play. Astute critics have noticed those plays are not only gay, they are also intelligent and talented. We put the three things that we were forbidden to be in New Mexico and Missouri into our work, and so did many other people, and Off-Broadway was born. So Off-Broadway defined. In the 1860s, the other arts entered the modern era, painting, literature, music. Theater did not, because it costs money to do theater. The other arts you can do alone, starving in a garret. You can't do theater without an audience, without actors, so theater lagged behind. In the 1960s, at the Cafe Chino, theater entered the modern era with a brilliant idea. If you do it for free, you can do whatever you want to. So the off-Broadway idea was to do theater for free in places that made their living by other means. Cafes, coffee houses, bars, libraries, churches, bookstores, galleries. You see, by doing it for free, we didn't have to care if somebody liked it or approved of it. Well, it turned out a lot of people liked and approved of just exactly that kind of theater. They just hadn't known it was possible before. And we reformed theater. Within a few years of the Chino starting to do original plays regularly, there were 300 off-Broadway theaters where there had been none a few years before. And then around the world, of course. And the off-Broadway idea and the plays that resulted from it, and not just scripts, but performance styles, has affected every performing art since. Not only stage, but movies, TV, rock concerts, all can be traced in a direct line back to the Chino, Tom O'Horgan, who invented modern musical theater with Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar, did his first 2 plays at the Chino. Everything tracks back to it. It was amazing. It was like being in All About Eve or The Red Shoes, having these wonderful creative friends living in each other's back pockets. Michael Warren Powell, an actor, improvised a line which I put in The Haunted Host. Lanford Wilson took a line from The Haunted Host and put it in Madness of Lady Bride. Paul Foster took a line from The Madness of Lady Bride and put it in his Heims Kringla. I mean, it was like that. We were inspiring each other. I remember one day a playwright named Clarice Nelson came down the street looking dazed. I said, "Clarice, what's wrong?" She said, "Nothing's wrong. Lanford just did an entire act in Largo." You know, we were inspiring each other. We didn't know anybody had ever done experimental theater before, and we did all the experiments over and over and changed the world.
I'm Vash, Boddie, and you're listening to excerpts from my conversation with playwright Robert Patrick.
I didn't know I could write plays. I wrote The Haunted Host just because there was the Chino where I could walk in and say, "Joe, I wrote a play, why don't you put it on?" In fact, Joe didn't want to put on my first play. He said, "You're a nice guy, playwrights are terrible people." He threw the play in the garbage and said, "You'll thank me for this." But Lanford Wilson, Tom Ian, and Paul Foster, 3 major off-off playwrights, were standing by, and they said, "Joe, you should do Bob's play. He does a lot of work around here. He pulls his weight." Well, it turned out to be quite a hit, and I did more and more, and they just poured out of me. It got to where I was the go-to person. If you were running an off-off theater and some show didn't show up, you call Bob, because they knew I could get a show up in a day or 2. Ellen Stewart had a show canceled at Christmas time once. In 2 days, I had a 34-person Christmas carol up with 12 new songs. Samuel French Play Publishers called me New York's most produced playwright in 1972. Highlights: Broadway opening was a highlight. Opening Kennedy's Children on Broadway was a highlight. Not so much because it was Broadway as because at Sardi's I got to sit with Tennessee Williams, who raved about the play. And the next day he called me and said that he'd been on a radio show and they had told him specifically he could not say anything about Kennedy's Children. And he went ahead and said it was the best play about the 60s anyway. I made some inquiries and discovered some kind of fix was in. The London critics had criticized the New York critics for not discovering me. The New York critics didn't take well to this. Clive Barnes gave Kennedy's Children a career-making rave in London. In New York, his review was so vague, you could not tell if he had even liked it or not. Friends told me that they'd call the box office to get tickets and be told that a show was sold out when it wasn't. Other friends went to ticket brokers and were told there are no tickets for Kennedy's Children. The guy who interviewed me for the New York Times called me a couple of days later and said, "You seem like a nice guy. I've got to tell you. I'll deny this if you say it, but I've been told to make you look like an idiot. It's a kill job." It didn't matter. I was very unhappy being a success. I loved the money. God, I loved the money. But an example of what success was actually like, Julie Newmar decided we should fire Shirley Knight and put her in the role that Shirley was playing in Kennedy's Children, followed me, stalked me. Restaurants around Times Square would call each other and say, "Is Bob there? Tell him to get out because Julie's headed over there." It was nightmarish. Shirley MacLaine grabbed me in the lobby of Kennedy's Children and shook me and said, "Why didn't you make me take that role?" And actually left scars in my upper arm. She's very strong. I was carrying a sofa on my back to La Mama, one of the most famous off-Broadway theaters, for a show. As I walked down the street with the sofa on my back, it rained, and the sofa got heavier and heavier. No one stopped to help me. No one cared. They had seen me carrying sofas on my back down that street for years and years and years. I got it into the theater only because it was a first-floor theater and the doors happened to be open. I got it into the theater and collapsed on the stage with the sofa on my back. My favorite actress, Carol Nelson, came in for rehearsal with 2 coffees, asked if I needed some help. She held it up while I got out. She gave me coffee, and then she said very delicately, "Bob, I've always meant to ask you. I know why I do this. People praise me, I get to wear pretty clothes, and I feel like I'm more than an office worker. Why do you do it?" And in 1990, I had no answer for her, and I quit. I learned about a high school theater organization called the Thespians, the International Thespians. I called them and said, "Use me." Over the next 10 years, I visited over 1,000 schools or school theater conventions on behalf of the Thespians. I was in every state except Hawaii. I relished it. I did whatever was needed. I spoke, I taught, I criticized. People asked me why I did it for free. And I said, because I wish someone like me had come to my school when I was a kid. And I would encourage people who have any kind of ability to offer to reach out to kids. Even if you yourself are in despair about life and the world and your profession, they're not. And they may overcome the things that have made you despair even. Go out and reach the kids, teach the kids, help the kids, find out what they want and try to give it to them.
I'm Vash, Boddie, and you're listening to excerpts from my conversation with playwright Robert Patrick.
I think it's great if the image they have of me inspires them at all to keep working or to keep trying to do better work. But I'm going to be honest with you. This week, when I'm getting a Lifetime Achievement Award and when people are starting to call me Icon, I am walking 40 blocks a day to get free lunch because I'm too poor to buy food regularly. At the same time, all the papers in my home state, New Mexico, are for the first time printing my picture in color, calling me great, calling me a Immortal native son, but I haven't heard of any theater in New Mexico planning to do a play of mine. It's an odd time to be a celebrity. When I first moved to LA, I met young TV writers who had been given more than they could chew. They hired me to ghostwrite for them. Alas, in the process of working with me, they felt they learned enough to do without me. It was great fun. I worked on some great shows. Robin's Hoods, a short-lived series. Lois and Clark, X-Files, Angel. Just very briefly on all these. And then some of these kids got jobs, and they weren't about to tell people, I used to use this ghostwriter. So that only lasted 2.5 or 3 years. I love singing my songs, and now that I've been recording them on YouTube and people have said that I sing well enough to be in public, I would love to do a club act. I would love to see certain of my plays done in culminative productions, especially Judas, Michelangelo's Models, and The Golden Circle. I don't feel they've ever been done for a large public as well as they could. I should like to do those. But right now, poverty takes up all my time and energy. So what's next for me is trying desperately to make sure I have the rent and some eating money. Desperately trying to sell everything I have on Craigslist. I have shopping carts. I go down the street offering stuff for $1. I'm a street corner bum. I, for whatever reason, can't get people to do all my last plays. So I post the scripts online. I post video scenes from my plays on YouTube. And I've always wished people knew more of my songs. Well, I myself have now recorded myself singing over 100 of my songs on YouTube. So it's getting out there. Here's just one. I write very conventional show tunes, I should warn you. Nobody ever knows where the song begins. It simply comes and goes, caroling on the breeze. No atlas ever shows where the song begins. It's even possible it circles the galaxies. It may take you by surprise on an April morning, then without a warning follow your whole life through. Only your lover knows where the song begins, because his song of songs begins and ends in you.
I'm Vash, Boddie, and this has been excerpts from my conversation with playwright Robert Patrick. Earlier this year, the New York Innovative Theater Awards presented Mr. Patrick the prestigious Artistic Achievement Award for his contributions to gay and independent theater. If you wish to read, see, hear, or contact Robert Patrick, you can do so via YouTube at Robert Patrick Scene, Robert Patrick Song, or Robert Patrick Play. TTV, y'all. Talk to Vash.